Hello, everybody.
Hello.
This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm here with my good friend, Dee Pierce, the
Happy to be
host.
here.
Thank you, Dee. I'm happy to be here too. Yeah, and Dee is the host of Around the World, okay, with Dee and Friends. So, uh, we have a number of topics here tonight. Uh, One is Stephanie Kelton on stimulus payments. Uh, and we'll go through a piece by her, but we have also a broader discussion of that on hand. Okay, and we have a piece by Nathan Tankus on the unconstitutionality of what Doge is doing. And that's a pretty good piece. And we have a piece that deals with the real Social Security fraud, not the supposed fraud that Musk says that he's uncovering without any proof yet.
hmm
I should add, but we're going to talk about the real Social Security fraud. Uh, that is to say, we're going to talk about his claims about what he is doing. Uh, and then the fourth topic is uh, Trump and Musk, who seem to be accomplishing the dumbest imperial collapse in history. So I think that's a very interesting topic, and we think the show should be a very interesting show for you folks. So we're going to share for a little bit, okay, and then we'll be back. And it would be very good if whoever is here would uh, share, like, and subscribe. And I see Steve Wolfman is here. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Steve.
It's good to see you, and thank you for coming. So let's go share for a few seconds, and then we'll be back. I should probably play some music while we share.
Yeah.
I got to arrange that,
Okay.
but not for now. For now, I'll just share.
okay.
Okay, so we'll start with a piece by Stephanie Kelton, of course, one of the leading writers and economists in the MMT movement, and a friend of mine, and my former editor at the MMT blog, the New Economic Perspectives blog, which she founded but is no longer actually running. She was my editor on that blog for a while. Anyway, this is The Lens, which is Stephanie Kelton's current Substack blog. This one is dated February 21st, 2025, and it's called Stimulus Checks and Partisan Dishonesty. I can see this is one of many titles. We could discuss taxing and partisan dishonesty, and we could discuss foreign policy and partisan dishonesty, and we could discuss uh, the issue of choice and partisan, dishonesty. Almost every public issue we could think of is characterized by partisan dishonesty.
Exactly.
But it's also certainly true that stimulus payments or stimulus checks are characterized by partisan um, um, dishonesty. So there's so much crazy happening on a minute by minute basis. And she crossed out a weekly and her daily and an hourly and settled on minute-by-minute basis that it's basically impossible to keep up, much less decide which bit of insanity to respond to. Now, that's the trouble with critiquing these days. There's so much insanity, you can hardly keep up with it. One of the classes I'm teaching this semester is a graduate course on public budgeting and finance. Okay, Stephanie is a professor at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. It's where she teaches. You can imagine what it's like to teach the nuts and bolts. All she'd have to do is change the B to a D. Teach the nuts and bolts of the federal budgeting process while trying to wrap your arms around the daily barrage of tax proposals and spending commentary coming out of Washington, D.C. And there are the nuts and bolts in Congress. Take a recent example. One minute, some guy on the internet is tossing out ideas about what to do with all the money Doge is going to save the American taxpayer, quote unquote.
Oh, God.
And then next minute, the president is telling reporters on Air Force One that he loves the idea of sending $5,000, quote, dividend checks to millions of American families. Some guy on the internet is named James Fishback, Jim Fishback. President Trump and Elon Musk should announce a, quote, Doge dividend, a tax refund check sent to every taxpayer, funded exclusively with a portion of the total savings that are delivered by Doge. Well, right there is a problem, because you can't send out any refund checks to taxpayers but on the authority of the executive branch alone. You need an appropriation for that. There's no such thing as a tax refund check. In fact, of the kind of tax refund check he's talking about here, the tax refund checks, okay, that we normally get are checks that are based on the money the federal government has withheld. That's based on the choices we make concerning the exemptions. Okay, so we take maybe 9 exemptions, let's say, and then we compute, what our tax would be according to the rules, okay, of computation. And on that basis, we get a refund check from the federal government. Now, those refund checks are appropriated by Congress, because Congress has authored the tax laws. And the way the tax laws work is what gets us the refund checks. So in a very important sense, it's Congress that has appropriated those particular refund checks. We get those refund checks according to laws passed by Congress that already exist. We can't get any refund checks of any kind or stimulus checks of any kind without Congress passing the stimulus. President Trump and Elon Musk do not have the authority to create such stimulus checks without Congress passing a law which specify the amount of the stimulus checks. Now, we all should know this, because we got $1,200 stimulus checks per person, $600 stimulus checks per person, and then a $1,400 stimulus checks. And in every case, those stimulus checks had to be appropriated by the Congress as part of a law that Congress passed. So, this idea that Trump and Musk should announce a Doge dividend is nonsense. That authority doesn't adhere in the presidency to do that. They can announce things once the Congress passes the appropriation, but what the size of that appropriation is up to Congress. Okay, so there's a big Fishback tweeted this, and he also tweeted a graphic, which I cannot read, which outlines a plan, and I cannot read this here. I'm doing my best to read it, but it's too small and I cannot expand it enough to read the damn thing. But what Fishback is doing here is talking about the benefits of the dividend. And he says, here's how it works. Doge is targeting $2 trillion in total savings. Okay, now how are they going to compute those savings? That's completely glossed over here. Completely glossed over. How are they going to target the savings? Well, the assumption is they're going to cut a whole bunch of federal employees and they're going to get savings. And they're going to cut a whole bunch of programs and they're going to get savings. But what if the judges decide that they don't have the power to cut any programs and that their cutting of employees, is illegal? And so there's no $2 trillion, in total savings. And by the way, that $2 trillion is unrealistic. Musk hasn't even proved that he's made $1 trillion in savings yet. There are people who already think he has no savings. How could he have no savings when he's firing federal employees? Well, economists can do impact studies of the effects of he's cutting however number of federal employees they're going to cut. Let's say they end up cutting 400,000 federal employees. 20% of the workforce or something like that. Okay, and then the economists do impact analyses of what the consequences were of cutting that number of employees in whatever agencies there are, and so on and so on and so on. Let's say the cuts, at the Defense Department have the effect of causing a war in which we have to spend $2 trillion. Then the net effect of making those cuts is going to be, let's say, let's assume they came up in the end with $200 billion savings. So $200 billion minus $4 trillion is negative $3.8 trillion. In other words, I'm saying if you're going to compute the true cost, okay, of these cuts, or the true savings of these cuts, you have to subtract the supposed savings based on the salaries of people or the cutting of programs with the effects of those cuts on the real economy or on real government spending. Now, it may take a while to compute that. It may take a few years to compute it, but it's up for debate whether the so-called savings from Doge activities are really going to turn out to be savings or whether they're going to turn out to be net costs. So I thought it was important to make that point. But in this graphic, we have a bunch of things. We have a bunch of, supposed benefits. The value of restitution, righting the wrong done to the taxpayer. Okay. Here, what he's doing is he's admitting that what's done with the supposed taxpayer dollars, and we'll get into that, just a little later, that what's done with the taxpayer dollars, may have negative effects. And that's, of course, right. That's true. It may be that the misspending of dollars by the federal government is costing us a huge amount, okay, of money. But it may also be that Doge's activities are going to cost us money. So we don't know what the value of restitution is going to be in this case until we've done the real true costing. Then he points up sharing the benefits of cost cutting with the taxpayer. Okay, well, that assumes there are going to be any net benefits from cost cutting. But if the benefits of cost cutting are going to be shared, then it's Congress that's going to have to appropriate that sharing. And then the other question, won't the dividend increase the deficit? President Trump is contingent on spending cuts. It is truly a tax refund. It is contingent on spending cuts. But what if more has to be spent because of the effects of what Doge is doing in the federal government? Basically, I made that point already. We don't know whether there's going to be a dividend from Doge or not. If there is a dividend, and then once again, it would be up to Congress to share it. Okay, it would not be up to the president, okay, to do the sharing. Okay, now notice this is not what happens at the state level. For example, Sarah Palin when she was the governor of Alaska some time ago, got some oil revenues from oil drilling in her state. And then she decided to share out some of the revenue to taxpayers. I think it was like $400 checks for the taxpayers, coming from the oil revenues. Okay, now even there, I don't know whether as governor she had the authority to do the sharing, or whether what she did was to talk to the state legislature and say, hey, give me the authority to share the revenue. The point here, though, which is very, very important, is that the tax revenue at the state level is actually collected by the state, and in settlement at the bank, the state is using that revenue is credited to the state. So the state has that revenue, and the state legislature is free to appropriate a certain amount of it for sharing. That's what happens at the state level. But the federal government is not like the states. What happens at the federal level is that there is no taxpayer money. Because when the Federal Reserve gets a deposit from the Treasury Department, what it does in the process of settling the deposit is to destroy the tax revenue money and to issue new money, dollar for dollar, on the authority of the Federal Reserve Bank in the form of additions to the reserves at the Treasury Department. In other words, it marks up the balances in the Treasury spending account. But that's not tax money. That's money that has been actually created by the Federal Reserve using its accounting and business rules. That's what happens, okay, at the level of the federal government. So that is different from the state. And certainly, okay, at the federal level, it's necessary to have the permission of Congress to distribute some or all of those funds to the public. So I wanted to make that point. And there's a third benefit here, which I don't see because I can't read it. And the fourth benefit is incentivizing the labor force participation in 2025. Because if people participate in the labor force, they will have to pay federal income tax. And if they are taxpayers, then they'll get a share of the savings, okay, of Doge. So that is the idea here. But right now, according to law, the executive branch cannot cut federal spending. Congress has to appropriate the cuts. According to current law, okay, that is the Congressional Impoundment Act of 1974, the executive branch doesn't have the authority to cut spending. Congress has to cut spending by appropriating it. So, if there are savings by Musk and Trump, those savings, so-called savings, read failure to spend money, those savings are not going to be legal savings. They will only be savings by virtue of defying what Congress wanted the executive branch to spend. There's not going to be any dividend from that. The executive branch won't have the authority to provide such a dividend. All this is a fantasy. It's a fantasy for all the reasons that I stated. Musk is a total schmuck who doesn't understand federal financing or congressional appropriations. And James Fishbach is another schmuck who doesn't understand how it works. But let's go back to Stephanie's article, which is a short article. Sorry I interrupted it for all this long-winded stuff, but I thought you had to know about this. So Musk says he'll check with the president. He shouldn't be checking with the president. He should be checking with Stephanie Kelton to see if any of this makes any sense. By the way, the person who showed that there's no such thing as taxpayer money, which is spent, was actually Stephanie Kelton in a very important paper she wrote in 1998. And I'll give you the reference to that paper again. I did it before in another stream, but I'll do it again when I get finished with this. The president's remarks set off a serious debate about whether Doge can actually deliver enough savings to allow the president to refund that much money to taxpayers, and whether it would be inflationary to do so here, as you know, as Yahoo News. Yeah, and she has the word serious in quotes here because she knows it's not serious. Okay, whether there would be enough savings. And she has savings in quotes, in scare quotes, because she doesn't think there's going to be any savings. Okay, and then she has refund in quotes because it's not really a refund. She knows that. So anyway, here's the quote from Yahoo News. Doge's proponents were skeptical. Quote, love what Doge is doing, but this is a bad idea. There's no need to send, quote, dividend checks, unquote. And the dividend we get from slashing spending is that it brings inflation into check. But if the government sends out stimmy checks, inflation will come back with a vengeance, wrote Preston Brashers, tax policy researcher for the Heritage Foundation. Now, I've got to comment on that. He doesn't have a good model of inflation, so he cannot know whether the stimmy checks would cause inflation to come back with a vengeance. I mean, he just doesn't know. He's making the assumption that the more government spends, the more inflation is going to come back. But inflation may not come back because inflation may be getting caused by supply chains or price gouging, okay, or by victories, okay, the labor movement. But certainly the way Trump is treating the labor movement, there aren't going to be any victories from that. On the other hand, inflation might well come back with a vengeance because this administration is not going to do anything to stop price gouging in the private sector. And this administration is currently doing all it can to disrupt supply chains with silly tariffs. So whether or not the government sends out stimmy checks, we might have inflation coming back with a vengeance. But of course, some fool from the Heritage Foundation is not going to know any of this. Anyway, the real life numbers aren't making it clear that it could even happen. So Doge has reported that it's already uncovered and already cut back $16 billion in federal contracts. Again, okay, the legality of this is in question, and there are lawsuits. And if it turns out cutting back the $16 billion in federal contracts was illegal, then the government would have to go ahead and spend on these contracts anyway. And then that so-called 16 billion would not have been saved. Okay, even if Doge thinks it's already cut back 16 billion. Its supporters, including Fishback, claim the energy has slashed 1 billion spending per day. Those numbers are widely disputed. Yeah, I'll bet they're widely disputed. They're widely disputed at NPR. They're widely disputed, but even if they're accurate so far, if the courts decide in a certain way with regard to the lawsuits at issue right now, all those savings would be rolled back anyway, and Doge would be completely unsuccessful. Now, there was a proper way to Doge to do that. That is what they could have done, is they could have found out that there was 16 billion in contracts that were not necessary for the federal government. They could have reported that to Trump, who could have gone to the Congress and asked Congress to cut that 16 billion out so the federal contracts could be ended. But Trump, of course, can't be expended to do things in the right way that recognizes the separation of powers. So he did it in this way, which brings the 16 billion in cuts in federal contracts into question. Furthermore, even if the agency has slashed 1 billion in spending per day so far, that doesn't mean that that kind of success in cutting back is going to continue for Doge. I mean, for example, Doge cut 300 people out of the group that monitors, our nuclear force. I'm sure that was a big savings, of money. Then they found, a couple of days later that, they were mistaken to make that cut. So they had to go back and hire all the people back. Now, that's not the only case where they've made mistakes. They're going to make a lot of mistakes because they're not thinking through these cuts. It's obviously they look at a line item and make a judgment and say, we don't need that. And the people doing this examination have no idea whether we need anything or not. And so, this is a mess. It's been a mess so far, and it's going to continue to be a mess because Elon Musk and his people don't know how to do things in the public sector. It's not like running Twitter. By the way, he caused all kinds of losses for Twitter also in the way he's been running Twitter. That's a whole nother issue, though. Going on with the article. Of course, if it's something the president wants, then all the president's men will line up to defend it. That includes Kevin Hassett, the chair of Trump's Council of Economic Advisors, who is dutifully reassuring everyone that sending out 5,000 payments is not going to re-agitate inflation. Well, I'd like to see the reasoning of Kevin Hassett on that, because I'll bet dollars to donuts that Kevin Hassett has no good model of inflation. And why do I think that? Well, I think that because the only good models of inflation that are coming out of anywhere right now are models coming out of the MMT group. And Kevin Hassett, okay, is not an MMTer. For all I know, he's probably an Austrian school economist. And they believe in the quantity theory of money. So, going on, the quote, if we don't spend government money and we give it back to people, then if they spend it all, you're even. What? If we don't spend government money and we give it back to people, then if they spend it all, you're even. What the hell's he talking about? He doesn't know what he's talking about.
No, he doesn't. The whole thing is crazy.
It's crazy, but they're probably going to save a lot of it, in which case you're reducing inflation. Well, the rich people they want to give the tax money to, they're probably going to save a lot of it because that's what they do. But $5,000 checks going to regular people, they're not going to save. They're going to pay off a credit card debt with it, or they're going to spend it, okay, on everyday stuff. That's really the point of it, isn't it? It's to make the administration popular by giving out $5,000 payments to families. Anyway, this offhand comment, by Kevin Hassett is obviously nonsense. He's just BSing. He didn't go through any complex thought process or calculation to come up with the idea that it's not going to be inflationary. Now, I admit I don't know if it's going to be inflationary. I'm not saying it's going to be inflationary, but I admit I can't know whether it's going to be inflationary without figuring out all the factors involved. In other words, the other things that the Trump administration is going to do. For example, is he going to put on any price controls? Probably not, because he never thinks about putting on price controls. But if he did, that would damp down any inflation. He's probably not going to stop any price gouging, right? Not going to do that. But if he did, it would damp down the inflation. He's probably not going to try to stop disturbing the supply chains, right? But if he did, that would, damp down inflation. So I don't know whether it would be inflationary or not, because I don't know what else Donald Trump is going to do. Now, maybe Kevin Hassett knows. If he would tell us, we might be able to give more credit to what he was saying. Now, Stephanie comes to partisan dishonesty. I'm not going to speculate on the inflationary impacts of the proposed checks. There's zero evidence that this is a remotely serious plan, and it would depend on too many other variables where there just isn't enough clarity. See, Stephanie knows what she's talking about. What bothers me is how utterly partisan and dishonest many economists have become when it comes to attacking or defending things like this. Hassett was advising the White House in 2020 when Trump signed the multi-trillion-dollar COVID relief packages that the first two rounds of stimulus checks to most Americans. Those were apparently innocuous. But Trump and his economists blamed the third round of stimulus checks, those distributed by Democrats in the spring of 2021, for helping to fuel the worst spike in inflation in 4 decades. Then Stephanie asks, how much was paid in each of the 4 rounds? Round 1, March 2020, $1,200 per income tax filer, and $500 per child, which is what was given to people according to the CARES Act. Also, the $1,200, was given to people in line with the CARES Act. It was an appropriation, okay, in other words. So, notice it was $1,200 per filer, per income tax filer. So it wasn't based on whether you paid taxes. It was based on whether you were a filer or not. Now, will it be based on who's a filer this time? We don't know. They've not been specific enough about it. They're very loose in their talking and their assumptions. So they're probably assuming that an income tax filer is an income tax payer. But very often that is not the case. There are a whole class of people who file their income taxes dutifully every year, but when they take their exemptions, okay, and deductions, it turns out they don't owe any taxes, so they don't pay any taxes. But they are filers. Round 2, December 2020, $600 per income tax filer, $600 per child. Round 3, $1,400 per income tax filers and $1,400 per child. So let's total that up. Trump was responsible for $1,800 per filer and $1,100 per child. Biden was responsible for $1,400 per filer, which is $400 less than Trump, but $800 per child, which is $300 more per child. So it seems to me the payments, were equally inflationary. Pretty much, equally inflationary. So they came at different times. Okay, and you could argue that Biden should not have had his stimulus checks because the first 2 stimulus checks were adequate enough. You could argue that. I don't think it would be right, but you could argue that. Okay, so Stephanie goes through the exact amounts that were spent. She goes through the number of payments and she goes through the amounts of the payments. The first stimulus check not just the stimulus checks, but the child payments, $401 billion, $511 million, $524,000. Second stimulus check, $141,471,821,000. Biden's check, so Trump's payments were about $542 billion. Whereas Biden's checks were only about half as much, $271 billion. So, who is more responsible? Honey, the music is too loud. Bonnie doesn't hear me. Okay, anyway. Stephanie says, I'm not here to argue that the third round of payments didn't contribute to inflationary pressures. There's ample evidence that they played, a relatively modest role. Yeah, there is ample evidence. There's a paper from the Brookings Institution. There's also a paper from the EPI that suggests that the major factors in inflation were the supply chain disturbances and the price gouging, that those were the 2 main factors, in causing the inflation. But it is relevant here to note that the Trump payments were roughly twice as large, as the Biden payments. So why would it be proper to say that the Biden's payments were inflationary and the Trump's payments were not inflationary? I mean, you can argue the sequence, but you can't argue on the face of the amounts that the Biden stimulus was more inflationary than the Trump stimulus. Stephanie goes on. What everyone seems to have forgotten is that Trump didn't want to sign a bill that included $600 stimulus checks in December 2020. He demanded $2,000. I'm asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple. Trump had to settle for $600. By the way, the reason why he had to settle for $600 is because of his stupidity. That is to say, what Trump could have done at that time is instead, of actually nominating Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court, he could have pulled her nomination, in October of 2020, and he could have said to Mitch McConnell, pass my $2,000 stimulus first, and then I'll put in your nomination for Amy Coney Barrett, and you can then confirm her. But until I get my 2,000, you don't get her as a Supreme Court justice. Mitch McConnell would have folded in that instance, and Trump would have had his $2,000 checks. By the way, if he'd gotten his $2,000 checks, he might have won the election in November of 2020. Anyway, Trump was too stupid to do that, so he had to settle for $600. And 3 months later, witnessed Biden signing the remaining $1,400 into law. Raise your hand if you think Hassett and other Republicans would have spun a different inflation take if that same 2,000 had arrived in one big, beautiful red envelope. Yep, that makes the point that there was partisan hypocrisy to do this in relation to the claims, actually partisan dishonesty in relation to the claims that something is going to be inflationary or something is, not going to be inflationary. Stephanie makes that point, I think, extremely well. So, Dee, I interspersed my discussion of all this as I was going through the reading. Do you have any further comments on it?
Basically, kind of what I was talking about before the show is the fact that the U.S. citizens at large do not understand how money works. They don't understand the monetary policy.
All right, and not only the U.S. citizens, Donald Trump doesn't understand, and nobody in his administration appears to understand.
Right. So they're saying this as we're giving you money back for what you sent us. I mean, it's stupid.
And it's stupid because they don't have authority to do that, because they don't know how the Congress and the executive works. And they're assuming they're dealing with a private company and that the head of the private company can do what he or she wants.
Right. And then I saw something, some in the government are saying, not in the government, Trump and that whole crowd are saying, that they don't have to go by the Constitution. The Constitution is nothing. They're not giving any credence to the Constitution. And it's like, well, just then get the heck out of this. That's one of those cases where get the heck out of the country if you don't want to respect the Constitution, the law of
Absolutely.
the land.
Absolutely. I wish he would get the heck out of the country, because he doesn't respect the Constitution. Now that's
Wait, excuse me. A lot of them do not respect the Constitution because that section where it talks about providing for the public good.
yes.
The public good is always ignored.
Yes, the public good is always ignored, and they don't respect the Constitution because they take an oath to support and defend the Constitution when they take office, and the very next day they do things against the Constitution.
Right.
as witness what, based on what Trump is doing and what Musk is doing and what all of his cabinet officers are doing, they're not fulfilling their oaths. Right now, almost every one of them is impeachable.
Right.
I mean,
And their goal,
certainly the OMB secretary is absolutely impeachable. The
well, their
Treasury
goal is to
secretary,
privatize everything.
I know.
They want to privatize so people who are have the government jobs now, they'd be like some equatable public, some corporation is who they
Right.
would be transferring over to. So there won't be a government running things. There would be these private corporations running them.
Yes. Okay, I don't see a bunch of comments here. I see a lot of highs and things like that. So, would you like me to put up?
Yes, and I just want to say with the U.S. Postal Service, with them talking about privatizing that to turn that into a for-profit entity, do you realize how sick that is? How the price of mail to make a for a post office to make a profit, but that's illegal anyway, isn't that? We had discussed that a few years ago, I think, that it's part of the Constitution or something. There's something with the Postal Service that it's always to be a public service run by the government.
It's mentioned in the Constitution. It's almost the only agency that's mentioned in the Constitution. Okay, I think the kind of I think the Constitution of the Postal Service, okay, as an independent entity.
Hmm.
In other words, what actually the Congress has done. I think, according to the unitary theory of the executive, which is what Trump is supposedly running on, okay, the post office is actually a function of the executive. So, if the unitary theory executive is, if the unitary theory is consistent, the post office has to be brought into the executive branch. It doesn't belong outside of the executive branch, and it certainly shouldn't be privatized.
No.
So that is, absolutely ridiculous in itself. Yeah, but I read that Trump is trying to get rid of Louis DeJoy. He wants his resignation so he can uh, he can do further privatization of the post office.
That is the stupidest. It's so ridiculous.
Yes.
Privatizing the post office. It's because the post office should make a profit. That is so ridiculous.
Oh, and by the way, it's even more ridiculous. Okay, for another reason. Uh, that other reason is that the reason why the post office is unprofitable, okay, at this time, is because the post office has to guarantee the solvency of the retirement plans, going out something like, I forget what the number of years is. It's something like 75 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. Yeah, just to
So
harass
they
the post
can't
office.
possibly make a profit
Hmm.
because they have to provide for retirement solvency going out 75 years. No private business has to do that. So if they reconstitute the post office as a private business, uh, then the post office might be immediately profitable.
It's crazy.
It's crazy, and it's perfectly possible. The post office, would be immediately profitable. So Trump probably knows that. What he's going to try to do, okay, is to privatize it, and then it won't have the requirements for the retirement plan anymore. And so then it's going to, be immediately profitable. Then Trump is going to point to it and say, see what kind of a genius I am? Under me, the post office became profitable because I privatized
It's so stupid.
it.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to Nathan's thing.
Okay.
But this is, I
It's
mean, these,
ridiculous.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is ruining the United States.
Oh, it is.
Oh, but okay, before we go on to Nathan's, I do want to say so far, if you're attending this stream, and if you haven't attended some of the others, uh, uh, um, you might think uh, that I don't think that Trump has, done anything good. That I'm completely biased against him, and I don't think, he's done anything good. But if you attended the last two streams, uh, then you would find that I think Trump's changes in foreign policy thus far, at least with respect to Ukraine, are very creditable and very promising. And after all, in the end, he may not support he may not support the Netanyahu regime in the Middle East. I'm sure he's going to be supportive of the continued existence of Israel, but that doesn't mean that he's going to get into a war over it.
Right. Netanyahu's messing things up for himself.
Yes, and he's messing things up for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Trump will get tired of it at some point. Okay, because I know Trump doesn't have any love for the Palestinians.
No.
That is sure. But he doesn't want the Palestinians and the Israelis to get him into a war with Iran either.
No.
And so, in that sense, he's a big improvement over the Biden administration and a big improvement of the promises made by, what would have been a Harris administration. Though I think that Harris might have proven to, be more reasonable on both of the major foreign policy issues, but we'll never know that.
No.
It's a counterfactual. So,
Okay, so here we go. Why should we care if the Trump administration and Musk Doge are acting unconstitutionally?
a good question. Why should we care?
And this is by Nathan Tankus.
Yes, I'm going to skip the introductory part because he always says the same thing in the introductory part. Okay, so right under subscribe is where this post really starts.
Okay. For almost 3 weeks, I've spent an enormous amount of time on the details of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, Deutsche's incursion into it, and the manifold dangers it poses. Today, I want to step back and reemphasize the bigger picture that I started with exactly 3 weeks ago in my January 31st piece. Everything about, oh, there's this thing in the way. Okay. Everything about the Trump administration's impoundment push you were too afraid to ask. It's immediately understandable that after reading nearly 25,000 words, God, is that really how many words it spent? That's 25,000 words. Many readers do not feel like they have or have retained a focus on the big picture. I also haven't particularly emphasized why exactly these particular unconstitutional actions, or even unconstitutional actions in general, are undesirable or dangerous. To some, that is all painfully obvious. Uh, Counterintuitivity, I am going to start by arguing that an action being unconstitutional does not necessarily make it bad or undesirable. Take, for example, the federal government's repudiation of the quote gold clauses in Treasury securities under the Roosevelt administration. Where am I?
Here,
Okay, this meant that bondholders would be paid in dollars in the quote face value amounts listed on the bond for both principal and interest, despite the fact that there were so-called quote gold clauses requiring the equivalent in gold. This mattered because Roosevelt, when he got into office, increased the official dollar price of gold to $35 an ounce. The Supreme Court's decision over this issue in the case Perry versus United States just happened to have passed its 90th anniversary on Tuesday. It is not very well known that this itself was a constitutional crisis. In the 5 weeks between the beginning of oral arguments in Perry versus United States and the court's decision, President Roosevelt decided that regardless of the outcome, he would stick to abrogating the gold clauses. Just 3 days after oral arguments concluded, President Roosevelt told Treasury Secretary Morgenthau, according to his diary, the President argued with me that he wanted me to keep things on an unsettled basis until the Supreme Court handed down its decision. He said that he wanted this for judicial and political reasons. He said the only way that the man in a taxicab can become interested in the gold case is if we kept the story on the front page. They said I want bonds to move up and down in foreign exchange. He said if we keep things in a constant turmoil, if the case should go against us, the man in the street will say, "For God's sake, Mr. President, do something about it." And he said, if I do, everybody in the country will heave a sigh of relief and say, "Thank God." Emphasis added, page 110, electronic pagination. Morgenthau pushed back strongly against using induced financial instability to pressure the Supreme Court, and the president decided to follow Morgenthau's advice. Nevertheless, the fact that President Roosevelt considered this strategy seriously is itself a sign of constitutional stakes. He even had a speech prepared in case the Supreme Court ruled against him that would boldly proclaim his intention to ignore the Supreme Court and to seek additional congressional legislation. Looking at Treasury Secretary Morgenthau's diary, once again, we find this remarkable description of Roosevelt reading the speech to him over dinner on February 13th, 1935. He was like a kid about it. He was so pleased with himself and with the statement. After finishing the statement, he said, "Joe Kennedy thinks that the statement is so strong that they will burn the Supreme Court in effigy."
For
Emphasis
those
added.
who don't know, but Joseph Kennedy uh, was the father, okay, of all of the Kennedy brothers and the Kennedy sisters.
Yes,
He was the Kennedy father.
right.
He was at the time. There were no billionaires at this time, but he was worth 60 billion. I'm sorry, $60 million, which at that time was a huge quantity, okay, of money. He was one of the richest people in the United States. Okay, please go on.
The entire speech is worth reading, and if people want to do that, they can do so. Roosevelt's aggressiveness regarding this issue behind closed doors can't help but raise one's eyebrows. Nevertheless, on the substance, I think Roosevelt was right to be so insistent about the issue. There is no good reason to let Treasury holders get 169% on the dollar simply because the United States decided to raise the price of gold, and it is easy to foresee a myriad of negative consequences emaciating from this. The implications of not abrogating the gold clause would have been far more serious in the case of a private contract, or more precisely, non-federal government contract, and Roosevelt was right to fear mass bankruptcy if the latter's constitutionality was not held up in the case ultimately known as Norman versus Baltimore and Oil Railroad Company.
Okay, actually, I think it's the Ohio Railroad Company.
The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company. This may seem to be a largely irrelevant detour to many readers, but it is not. It's important to emphasize that unconstitutionality is not ipso facto bad. Furthermore, while this incident did involve the flexing of executive power and ultimately the Supreme Court avoided ruling against the executive branch to avoid a constitutional confrontation, they would likely lose. It was not actually claiming ongoing power on behalf of the executive. The issue was circumstantial. You only need to abrogate Gold Clause once. Furthermore, even in Roosevelt's draft speech, he planned to seek legislative approval. The odd branch out was a notably reactionary Supreme Court, although in this case, justices known as sympathetic to the New Deal found themselves repulsed. Judicial review is not an absolute value in my view, but a highly imperfect check on the bona fide violation of rights and centralized unaccountable power. Judicial authority can, of course, itself be centralized and unaccountable power which violate rights individuals should otherwise have. Today, we again find a reactionary Supreme Court limiting not just executive, but even legislative power. Our recent circumstances are far more serious, in fact, because it is not a stodgy Supreme Court holding two long-standing positions, but instead a newly radicalized Supreme Court inventing doctrines that seem to be and are expressly designed to abrogate executive actions that they dislike and limit Congress's legislative power. Take, for example, the invented, quote, major questions doctrine, which was explicitly embraced in the 2022 decision West Virginia versus EPA. In this case, striking down the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate carbon dioxide emissions under the Clean Air Act, Chief Justice John Roberts explicitly says, in certain extraordinary cases, both separation of powers principles and a practical understanding of the legislative intent makes us, quote, reluctant to read into ambiguous statutory text. Delegation claimed to be lurking there. Utility Air 573 US at 324 to convince us otherwise, something more than a merely plausible textual basis for the agency action is necessary. The agency instead must point to, quote, clear congressional authorization for the power it claims. While this may seem superficially reasonable, what it means in practice is that courts can reject any administrative agency action they dislike and overrule any delegation of discretion to administrative agencies by Congress that they deem too sweeping. There is a reason that people like Vivek Ramaswamy, the very short-lived co-head of Doge, speak openly of taking the opportunity the major questions doctrine provides to, quote, shut down the administrative state, and opines that the, quote, constitutional republic created by the founding fathers has, quote, has three branches of government, not four.
That is a very, very good point.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, the same logic can be applied to what the executive branch is claiming for itself, okay, at this point,
Mm-hmm.
because the constitutional republic created by the founding fathers has three branches of government, not two and not one. Because, of course, what the administration is trying to do now is negate the central power of uh, Congress uh, to manage the purse of the United States, the spending of the United States, and the taxation, okay, of the United States. Okay, Trump is claiming that he has the right to impound spending, to cut spending, to cut personnel of the government. Those powers are reserved for the Congress and not for him.
Mhm. Recognizing that the current impoundment crisis comes from the same right-wing think tanks which built the modern right-wing legal movement and successfully led the Supreme Court to embrace their agenda, we can see better how this all fits together. Impoundment is meant to be the final demolition of the administrative state that the Supreme Court has been building up to. Before, their job was to weaken it themselves. Now the Supreme Court's job is to avoid confronting the constitutional crisis before us and let executive power take the reins, permanently demoting the previously so equal branches, expanding the president's executive power, embracing unitary executive theory, striking down laws passed by Congress, was all in the service of eliminating administrative agencies, especially, quote, independent administrative agencies, and shrinking Congress's ability to govern, even if at times it was in the name of Congress governing more. Now the baton has been passed in service of limiting the rights of individuals, especially minorities, and greatly enhancing centralized, unaccountable power.
I think that's a great observation by Nathan.
Mhm. Which brings us back to 1935. This time, in the Supreme Court case Humphrey's Executor versus United States, where President Roosevelt fired an Federal Trade Commission's commissioner for being out of step with the New Deal, the Supreme Court ruled that the executive officers whose scope for removal is determined by congressional statute could not be removed by the President for reasons other than the statutory provided ones. I think statutorily creating administrative agencies are important and think President Roosevelt overstepped here. Independent agencies, most notably the Federal Reserve Board, can be a problem, but overall it is good that we have differentiated a locus of authority, and some of them are insulated from day-to-day partisan politics. It should be no surprise that the Trump administration has explicitly stated its desire to overturn this case and on Tuesday issued an executive order called, quote, ensuring accountability for all agencies. The fact sheet's title is even more direct. Quote, President Donald J. Trump reins in independent agencies to restore a government that answers to the American people.
Okay, the White House has tweeted here. Congestion
Congestion.
pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York saved. Long live the king, President Donald J. Trump.
It's crazy.
And there he goes, King Trump. Now we have to say something about congestion pricing. They put into New York City uh, uh, that sort of regulation. So if people go to Manhattan at a certain hour, they have to pay more tolls. Okay. Uh, Trump, has been trying to defeat that. However, the truth is, congestion pricing has been very, very successful in alleviating traffic jams that have made it so impossible to get in and out of New York. For the first time, in decades, it's a reasonable thing, to get in and out, of New York. Uh, but Trump just wants to get rid of that and go back to the old system where a 45-minute trip takes an hour and a half. So, there we go. Anyway, going on with the article.
Which brings us to the answer to the question posted by the title of this piece. We should care about the unconstitutionality of the Trump administration's and Elon Musk's Doge, because it is furthering the centralization and expansion of unaccountable power in the service of abrogating more of our rights, our right to clean air and water, our right to the already too limited protection against discrimination, our already too weak right to privacy, our right not to be scammed and looted from, our workplace protections, and our right not to die from the mishandling of the nuclear stockpile because of inept, dangerous, and illegal mass firings, our already weak right to an education, most of all, our right to rebuild after the second Trump administration has smashed up so many of the tools of rebuilding. Ultimately, our right to make decisions about our own lives without being essentially micromanaged by venal billionaires. Hell, our right to have a truly different government after, quote, King Trump.
Okay, let us read that paragraph one more time, okay, if you will,
Okay.
because it is the point of the whole thing, and it is beautifully written.
Okay, this whole paragraph? Okay.
Yes.
Which brings us to the answer to the question posted by the title of this piece. We should care about the unconstitutionality of the Trump administration's and Elon Musk's Doge because it is furthering the centralization and expansion of unaccountable power in the service of abrogating more of our right to clean air and water, our right to the already too limited protections against discrimination, our already too weak right to privacy, our right not to be scammed and looted from, our workplace protections, and our right not to die from the mishandling of the nuclear stockpile because of inept, dangerous, and illegal mass firings, our already weak right to an education, most of all, our right to rebuild after the second Trump administration has smashed up so many of the tools of rebuilding. Ultimately, our right to make decisions about our own lives without being essentially micromanaged by venal billionaires. Hell, our right to have a truly different government after, quote, King Trump.
Now, this is a paragraph that the members of the Supreme Court should read
Mm-hmm.
very, very carefully and that they ought to contemplate about. Because this is, after all, okay, the heart of the issue. Many of our rights are being violated by this excessive concentration of power inside the executive branch, okay, of government. Uh, the kind of power which this Supreme Court has uh, so zealously given, okay, to the Trump administration, even before the Trump administration came into office again. The immunity decision, uh, a ridiculous decision. So many other ridiculous decisions by this particular Supreme Court, all in the service of consolidating power under the presidency. Now, I have to admit myself that in certain contexts, okay, I like the centralization of power, inside, okay, of the executive. I think it would make things a lot better if the Fed, uh, uh, were under the executive branch of the government, because then, okay, it would be completely unambiguous that the Treasury Department had the power delegated to it by the Congress, okay, to issue reserves of the United States. Okay, it would also be the case that uh, uh, the Federal Reserve was not so transparently controlled, by Wall Street. It would be more accountable to the people in that case. Okay. But across the board, the total concentration of power, okay, in a single executive, would undermine not only the Constitution and the operation of the Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence. It would be the basis of a tyranny. We would be back to tyranny after all of these years. So we have to stop what's going on. The Supreme Court has to come to its senses and has to decide the cases that are now coming before it in a way so as to recognize the vision, of a limited government. And that vision is that all power is not to be concentrated in the executive branch of government. What the decisions of the Supreme Court have allowed here is the very ordering by the executive branch, the very ordering of the arrest of the members of the Supreme Court that it does not like, the jailing of these people and the deposing of these people. And if this is done as part of the official functions of the presidency, according to the Supreme Court's own decision, there's nothing legally that could be done about that. I can't understand how they can't see the stupidity of that particular decision, the immunity decision of the Supreme Court, towards the end of the Biden administration. If that had happened, and I were the president of the United States at that time, and I were Biden, what I would have done was to have arrested all of the justices of the Supreme Court, except for the ones who voted against the immunity decision. And then I would have had my people go create some other cases to take up to the Supreme Court, knowing full well that the three justices who were left would vote to overturn, that immunity decision, because it would be obvious by that time that it was such a silly decision. I mean, really, I can't say too much about the stupidity of that particular decision. But the central point, that Nathan here is the relevant point for this particular decision. It's important that the unconstitutionality of what the executive branch wants to do in these cases be respected. So all the rights that are mentioned by Nathan here are rights that we will still have. Okay, do you have anything more to add?
It's you could see they're pretty much going by that whole playbook, that whole Republican, what is it, that the agenda they have.
Yeah, it was actually the playbook of the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
And both had that kind of playbook. It's interesting that some of the judges who are Federalist Society people are now realizing that there's too much concentration of power and are deciding against the Trump administration in this. But, it's the Federalist Society which has been backing this, unitary executive theory for so long, and bringing it to the fore. And that's the theory that Trump is implementing right now. I mean, that's the general principle, even over and beyond, the specifics of Project 2025.
So now they're seeing that actually what they would be maybe discussing over and over again, now they're seeing it in live time. And it's like, wait, this is not what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, we're getting an interesting phenomenon here now. We have more people in the stream. The stream has grown by a few people. But we're not getting any more comments. The last comment we had was at 9:12. and it is 10:29 right now. So I wonder what is going on with that. But let us get to our third article at this point, because we do want to finish before midnight, I think.
Yes.
This one is from Common Dreams, and it's about Social Security and Elon Musk. And this relates to the first piece that we did actually tonight, Stephanie Kelton's piece. It also relates to the second piece we're doing. It's called Musk is Lying About Waste and Fraud in Social Security to Have an Excuse to Kill It. I think that's a good point. It's a typical Republican ploy. You lie about the waste and fraud in all social programs so you can kill them. Republicans have been pursuing that strategy since the 1940s. Anyway, the tagline of this is: the richest man alive wants to cut off your benefits and then have Congress use the savings to give himself a gigantic tax cut, I would add there, to give himself and his cronies and his donors and those very rich people who have voted him in a gigantic tax cut. Okay, and the author of the article is Nancy J. Altman, who is the president of Social Security Works and who has been fighting against cuts to Social Security since 1983. She says, the only efficiency Elon Musk cares about is how efficiently he can take your money to line his own pockets. Despite U.S. President Donald Trump's campaign promises, Musk is coming after your earned Social Security benefits. President Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican and war hero, could have been talking about Elon Musk when he warned in 1954 of a handful of, quote, Texas oil millionaires, unquote. And of course, once again, there were no billionaires then, attempting to abolish Social Security. Quote, their number is negligible, and they are stupid, unquote, he wrote. Musk has made no secret of his disdain for our Social Security system. In just the last few weeks, he has used his gigantic platform to spread outrageous lies about Social Security. Unlike the extremely rich, stupid men to whom Eisenhower was referring, Musk is, unfortunately, not just ignorant. Trump is giving him the power to steal our earned benefits. Musk is drawing on an old playbook of claiming that the government in general, and Social Security in particular, is full of, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse, unquote. Then when he steals your benefits, he will claim that he is simply cutting waste. I'm afraid that is what Musk is about. Both Musk's ignorance and his anti-Social Security playbook were on full display Tuesday when the shadow president talked to reporters in the Oval Office, trying to convince us that our extremely efficient Social Security system is rife with fraud. He unknowingly proved how economical its administration is when he asserted, quote, just cursory examination of Social Security, and we've got people in there that are 150 years old. Excuse me, I got to take a drink. Okay, that's better. No one born 150 years ago is receiving benefits. The hardworking civil servants at the Social Security Administration are extremely diligent in tracking the deaths, of beneficiaries. Social Security spends millions of dollars each year to purchase the automated death data of state vital records agencies. And Social Security provides a lump sum death benefit in part to encourage the families of beneficiaries to report their deaths promptly. When beneficiaries die, their benefits are immediately terminated. Eligible survivors, if any, start to receive the benefits their loved ones have earned before them. Sorry, I had to take a couple of pills. Uh, honey, there's noise coming from that.
I can't figure out how to stop it.
Turn it off.
Okay.
It is important to recognize that what Musk and others label, quote, waste, unquote, is usually unavoidable because of the way politicians have drafted our laws. For example, Social Security benefits are paid in the month following the month that they are due. That means that if you die at the end of the month and are paid a benefit a few days later, at the start of the next month, that is considered an overpayment, even when the death is quickly reported and the benefits are quickly canceled. The law requires the Social Security Administration to claw back those benefits from the grieving survivors, which it routinely does. Again, no one born 150 years ago is still receiving benefits. But here is where Musk is showing his ignorance, which I think he is a great amount of ignorance in what he does. I'm sure he's brilliant at some of the things he does, or there's all the evidence of that, but he doesn't know about what people do and what the government does. And he can't take the time to learn it because he's doing so many things at once. He is spread so thin. He is not available to devote full time to Doge and full time to, being rational about the cuts that he is trying to make. That's simply common sense. Let's take the example, going on with the article, let's take the example of a person who is issued a Social Security card as an infant and dies at age 10, never having received a penny of benefits. Social Security doesn't waste taxpayer dollars finding that information and canceling their Social Security number. This would be prohibitively expensive, and wasteful. Moreover, most adults who die leave behind spouses and children, including adult disabled children, who may be eligible for benefits for many years based on the decedent's earnings record. Therefore, that record may remain active for a very long time. For example, the last person to receive a Civil War pension was a veteran's disabled daughter who died less than 5 years ago in 2020. Disturbingly, the reason Musk was able to reassert the ignorant claim about 150 years old is that he has access to our personal data. Because Musk has access to the Treasury's payment system, he has the Social Security numbers of every worker and Social Security beneficiary. He also has bank account numbers and other sensitive uh, private information. He does, but I have to point out that with respect to the Treasury Department, uh, there was a temporary restraining order, which I believe is still in place, okay, which actually requires the records uh, that were picked up by Doge personnel from the Treasury payment system to be destroyed. There are not supposed to be any of those records still existing outside of the Treasury Department. And if there are, that's a violation of the court order. And that should be punished by contempt of court. I just had to make that point. He also has our bank account numbers and other sensitive uh, um, private information. Musk and his minions are reportedly now not just at the Treasury, but also at Social Security's headquarters in Baltimore. That means they already may have access to how much a person has ever earned, at what job and when, how old they are, their marital status, and more. Musk may also have access to the medical records of every single one of the millions of Americans who have applied for disability benefits. No elected, unconfirmed ideologue should be anywhere near those records, especially not the wealthiest man in the world, given his numerous conflicts of interest. And there's a link here to an article about his conflicts of interest. Okay, it's, from New York Times, that just lists the company's conflicts. In other words, the companies he owns and his conflicts of interest as a result of his owning, those companies. And those companies are getting benefits under the shakeup by Donald Trump. That's made clear by the Times article. What is going on should be obvious. Musk wants to cut off your benefits, then have Congress use the savings to give himself a gigantic tax cut. Well, of course, he can't give himself a gigantic tax cut, but what he can do is if he gets Congress to cut all these benefits, then he can make the argument to Congress, or Trump, okay, can make the argument to Congress. Well, now we can afford this tax cut because it's not going to result in deficit spending, because look at all the cuts we made to the social safety net. Now, the awful truth about this is that this is totally unnecessary, and it may be very damaging. The reason why I say this is because the United States has a balance of payments deficit, a current account deficit. That means that a large proportion of our private sector money is going to foreign nations because of this trade deficit. That's creating a gap in the macro economy of the United States, which is depressing to economic activity. To make up for that gap, we need budget deficits from the federal government. If the trade deficit, for example, is running now, let's say it's running at 5%, we need a budget deficit of 5%, okay, to make up for that, just to stay even. Trump's gigantic tax cut may not be enough to offset the trade deficit. We may actually need larger deficits. given leakage to savings that we have in the macro economy and leakage to the trade deficit, we may need to have a budget deficit to stay even that's as large as $2.7 trillion. Right now, the budget deficits have been running at something like $1.3 trillion. We need budget deficits that are larger, not smaller, than what we have now. So the cuts that Musk is trying to do may counterintuitively harm the economy and result in a serious recession, or a depression that in turn would activate the automatic stabilizers and increase the government deficit as opposed to decreasing it. It's all very complex because there are a number of feedback loops in here. And of course, Musk doesn't have a clue about that. He doesn't have a clue about the complexity of the macroeconomy because he's never studied it. He's never read about it. He's never been concerned about it. And he's totally the wrong man for this particular job, which is not surprising because Trump most of the time selects people who are wrong for their particular jobs. In his first administration, the only good person that he really hired to run anything was the trade executive, the head of the trade office, who did a good job of, actually negotiating the trade agreement, between the United States and Mexico and Canada. That was a big improvement over the democratic trade agreements that previously had existed. That was a good thing the Trump administration actually did. And if I remember correctly, that trade executive is back now in this particular administration. It is a good appointment, but in Trump's first administration, that's the only good appointment that I can remember that he made at the top level, at the cabinet level. Everybody else was a damn loser all the way down the line. There may also be a lot of losers in this particular cabinet as well, but I also have hopes that Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy, will turn out to be pretty good, and that maybe there's hope for some of his foreign policy appointments also, in spite of their unsavory personal characteristics. But anyway, that's another issue. I don't want to get distracted by that issue. But Social Security is incredibly popular, to go on with the article, so he can't be open about his intentions. Instead, he's trying to convince Americans that our Social Security system is overrun with massive fraud. The truth, is the opposite. And of course, I'm arguing here that the real fraud is not in the Social Security system, but where the fraud is in the Musk arguments to try to cut the Social Security system. That is a fraud. The savings he is already claiming, is a fraud. His arguments about those savings are a fraud. His whole operation is fraudulent, and it shouldn't be getting any credit at all. And this nonsense business about a $5,000 dividend coming from Social Security cuts and other cuts, a $5,000 per family dividend for all the reasons I mentioned earlier in this stream, that is total nonsense. Going on, less than 1% of Social Security payments are improper. And remember that already low percentage includes all beneficiaries who die immediately before their benefit is due. Given that these and all other improper payments constitute less than 1% of all payments made, those that are the result of fraud are vanishingly small. This is in sharp contrast to private insurance. And of course, Trump wants to privatize the Social Security system. They don't really want to get rid of the Social Security system. They want to privatize it by turning the accounting total that's in the trust fund, actually monetizing that total, then they want to make it available to private managers to manage on the stock market. And they think that that's going to reduce Social Security fraud. That is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. This is in sharp contrast to private insurance. Indeed, the American Academy of Sciences issued a report just last September about private insurance and concluded that, quote, insurance fraud is widespread, unquote. I'm sure if Elon Musk was running an insurance company, it would also be widespread in that company. Ironically, the best way to stop improper payments, including those vanishingly few that result from fraud, is to adequately staff the Social Security Administration, where Musk, of course, is trying to cut it right now, right? And face-to-face transactions at your local Social Security office will catch the fraudsters. Online transactions generally won't. And of course, Musk wants to turn the whole thing over to online transactions and cut back the personnel at the local Social Security office. Okay, by the way, one of the most unpleasant experiences you will ever have is going to the local Social Security office to try to get them to fix a problem. It's not that the people aren't present or unhelpful or anything like that, but there's a huge shortage of people in those offices, and if you go there to try to fix a problem, you cannot get to see a person, without a 3 or 4 hour wait. There are not enough people to service the public in any reasonable time because the idiots in Congress are trying to save money which can be created through the will of Congress at any time. There is no need for austerity in the offices of the Social Security Administration. And again, that's what Trump is trying to do here. Unfortunately, your local Social Security office will be closing. Musk has instructed the General Services Administration to terminate all federal office leases, including every Social Security office and every post office. Musk will do whatever it takes to avoid paying his fair share and enrich himself at our expense. He has his eyes on our Social Security. He lies about fraud, that is, he's fraudulent about fraud, might shake people's confidence, but they are unlikely to shake people's support for Social Security. His rummaging around in our private information is unprecedented. It's hard to know what he has in mind or how to stop him, but there is one thing we can absolutely stop. We can stop Congress from cutting our benefits. We must demand that every member of Congress stand up to Musk's cynical efforts to steal our earned Social Security benefits while giving himself and other billionaires a hefty tax cut. Every single member of Congress must publicly pledge that they will keep the promises Trump made on the campaign trail. That means not one penny in cuts to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. And of course, Trump has already cut Medicaid, right? Medicaid services already. Hopefully, these cuts and any cuts to Medicare and Social Security will be declared illegal by the courts. But in the end, Congress has to stand up and insist that none of these cuts be implemented. And that's going to be hard to get Congress to do because a lot of people in Congress believe in the kind of BS that Musk and Trump are stating. each day. There are at least 50 Republicans in Congress who totally believe this BS, and there are probably a lot more as well, and there are a few Democrats too. Every member of Congress must tell Musk and Trump, hands off Social Security, Medicare, okay, and Medicaid. In other words, hands off the safety net. And that is the final message of Nancy Altman here. And it is a very, very good message. And completely justified by MMT economics also. So, okay, on that note, what did you think of the article, D? Well, D must have stepped away. Looks like our attendance is increasing. And it looks like our comments are increasing too. Earl Lurie says, I'm listening. Evelina says, Trump's premise for Doge, which is government austerity, is a false one since it doesn't save citizens money, as he claims. The real aim is to cut back our rights. I agree. Evelina says preventing waste and fraud is the excuse. And Nancy Altman is saying that, and so am I, and so are you, is the excuse for undermining the Constitution. It is. It is, Evelina. You're completely correct in that. So, D, are you back yet? Nope. I guess D is not back yet. So I'm going to have to go on and get to the next piece because she isn't able to chime in. So here we are. This is our final piece of the night and our final topic of the night. Our topic is the dumbest imperial collapse ever, and it's based on this article, which is by Ryan Cooper. Musk and Trump are causing the dumbest imperial collapse in history. And the tagline is, empires have fallen before, but it's never been this purely idiotic. And D is back now. D, I see you're back just in the nick of time.
Okay.
Okay, so I have put up the article from the American Prospect by Ryan Cooper
Okay.
covering our final topic. So you can start to read it with the headline.
Okay. Musk and Trump are causing the dumbest imperial collapse in history. And I second that. February 19th, 2025. Empires have fallen before, but it's never been this purely idiotic by Ryan Cooper.
Yes.
Yes, and here are people protesting.
Trump Vance out now. Keep your tiny hands off of sovereign nations. Yes. Demonstrators march holding posters during a rally to protest President Trump's politics on President's Day, February 17th, 2025. Here, some of them are protesting his foreign policy. Keep your tiny hands off, okay, of sovereign nations. Well, I think that's probably about Greenland and Panama and maybe Canada, but it may also be about the Ukraine situation. because a lot of people are insisting that we uh, defend the Ukraine to the last of the Ukrainians.
And that's a horrible statement.
I know, but that seems to be what people think because they don't understand. If we stop the support of Ukraine now, that will stop the killing of the Ukrainians.
Exactly.
That's the surest and the easiest way to stop the further killing of the Ukrainians.
Yes.
Our support, okay, for Ukraine has resulted in, is directly responsible for the deaths of more than 1 million, okay, of the Ukrainians, and also responsible for 22 million people actually leaving the Ukraine, either dying or leaving the Ukraine, leaving a population of only 18 million there when they started out the war with 40 million.
Okay. A month into the second Trump administration, I think it's fair to conclude that the American empire in its current form is collapsing. The post 1945 global order, with the United States at its apex, is no more. America itself is not going anywhere, at least not yet, but the foundation of the empire, namely its structure of alliances and partnerships, has been dealt irreparable damage. Western Europe, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and especially Canada now view America with suspicion, if not outright hostility, and
Yeah,
they are right to do so.
they are right to do so, but he should have mentioned also Mexico. I mean, why
Yes,
is Mexico not included in this list?
I don't know.
I mean, they're pretty pissed off at us right now, too.
Yes, they are. Now, the history of empires is the story of their rise and inevitable fall. As Herodotus wrote about the Greek city-states, quote, most of those which are great once are small today, and those which used to be small were great in my own time. But nobody is matched to this current downfall for sheer egregious stupidity. Indeed, it's hard to think of even a single competitor for that title. There have been, to be sure, many idiotic imperial leaders throughout history, yeah, who helped blow up their empires through bungling and mistakes. Tsar Nicholas II was an incompetent boob whose closest advisor was a charlatan mystic, and he personally led the failed military effort during the First World War that eventually destroyed his regime. Yet Russia bore only a small share of the blame for starting the war in the first place, and other much better governed empires like Germany and Austria-Hungary, which shared much of that blame, also collapsed because of the war's strains. The eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire began when a large Roman army was heavily defeated by Goths, who had adopted many Roman military tactics. The Eastern European Empire persisted for another 1,000 years, but it too eventually collapsed following military defeat at the hands of the Ottomans. This is how empires tend to fall. Either they are defeated in battle and are conquered or collapse, or they suffer a succession crisis and fall apart, both often enabled by corruption and mismanagement, or they are simply eclipsed by another power, as happened when the British Empire fell short and the US succeeded it. President Trump, by contrast, was handed an empire in splendid condition. The core alliance of NATO was stronger than it had been in decades, as Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine pushed Sweden and Finland to join. Thanks.
Okay,
This is getting me sick reading that.
right. I have to disagree with this also. Okay, I think that NATO has been on the point of falling apart for some time. And one of the reasons for the Ukraine war was because NATO was trying to find a cause to keep it all together. Okay, but even if Sweden and Finland, chose to join NATO, Okay, because of that conflict, this did not make the core alliance of NATO any stronger.
No.
I mean, the West European nations, okay, of NATO, the people in those nations have been questioning the usefulness of the alliance internally for some time. The war in Ukraine has made the people of the U.S. question, the utility of that alliance, and the new president, okay, to decide himself that he wants out of the alliance, which is not an unsensible thing to want. Okay, so it seems to me at the inception of the war in 2000, okay, in 22, NATO was weaker than it had been in decades, not stronger than it had been in decades. So I disagree with that judgment entirely.
Mhm.
Okay, but anyway, let's go on.
Thanks to President Biden's policies, the American economy was the envy of the world.
I disagree with that judgment also.
Yeah, I'm saying the same thing. I'm like, what the heck am I reading? With the post-pandemic recovery that outstripped any peer nation. The dollar was still by far the most important reserve currency, and the U.S. still had control over global financial pipelines.
Okay, I suppose I have to say that uh, at the point that Trump came into office, when he inherited things, okay, from Biden, okay, the dollar was under severe attack across the world. Alternative institutions were being built to allow a migration from the dollar, okay, to local currencies. And even though the dollar was still by far the most important uh, currency for transactions, it was much weaker than it ever had been during the post-war period.
Hmm.
And the prospects for it to get weaker further in the coming 5 to 10 years were very, very strong. And Trump inherited that from Biden because the policies in his administration were such that they hastened the weakening of the dollar by employing sanctions that caused other countries to turn away from the dollar and to turn away from the SWIFT system. And this happened during the Biden administration, not during the Trump administration. Okay, please go on.
Oh, we gotta go down further.
Yes.
Okay. No, no serious threats on the horizon either.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I first read this. Okay, I like a lot of what Ryan writes, but it has to do with what he writes about the domestic scene. I don't think he knows his foreign policy. Okay,
Right.
please go on, D.
In its war with Ukraine, Russia has burned through most of its gigantic stockpile of Soviet-era military hardcore, taking perhaps 800,000 casualties, and put its economy under terrific pressure.
Okay, okay, comments on that. It may have burned through most of its gigantic stockpile, okay, of Soviet-era military hardware, but it hasn't been fighting the war with that hardware. It's primarily been fighting the war with newly manufactured hardware from factories that are now operating 24/7 and that are producing a huge amount of weapons and ammunition, lots and lots of new stuff, new versions of planes, drones, hypersonic missiles, new tanks. Uh, what they're producing, okay, is just incredible. They don't need any of the Soviet era military hardware anymore
No,
because
no.
they've thoroughly modernized, okay, their hardware. As far as casualties, uh, I can't say exactly what the total casualties are, but I know this. All told, the Russians and their allies too at the most total 130,000 fatalities, okay, during the war. And there were, uh, I don't think there were many more casualties than that. I would estimate at most they had a total of 250,000 casualties, and a lot of those casualties received very good medical care and were actually taken back into the service and put in the field. Once again, they were able to return to the war, okay, because of the way the medical care was managed in that particular context. And as far as the Russian economy is concerned, it's stronger now than it was before the war.
Mhm.
It's now, in terms of ranking the economy of the whole world, it's now the fourth largest. And it's displaced actually Germany as the fourth largest economy in the world. So this judgment about the Russian economy under terrific pressure, there's little evidence of that. No, the evidence is only from Western sources that are terribly biased. Now, Ryan has here, of course, uh, some links to these claims, because as a journalist, he's fairly careful. But I'll bet his links are only to Western sources that have been lying about the war since the first. Please go on.
Okay. Um,
Starts with China.
China, while the only peer competitor the U.S. has faced since 1991, is saddled with deep economic difficulties and looking down the barrel of population collapse.
Well, I don't see the deep economic difficulties. Again, I think what Ryan is doing is he's reading Western sources which are only looking at the negatives, the Chinese economy. We've been going over articles here for quite some time, okay, that show that China is exploding, okay, with economic activity compared to the United States or compared to any other country, in the world. And insofar as it's looking at a decline, okay, in its population, okay, it is doing so because the modernization of the country means smaller families. It's a normal process, and so far the population decline has not been affecting economic growth in Russia, which is still I'm sorry, in China,
China.
which is still very, very substantial.
Mhm.
So he may think it's looking down the barrel of a population collapse, but I think we will still see very, very large statistics, relating to economic growth in China, because literally they've been doing the impossible in infrastructure development, transportation and logistics development, technological development in almost every area. In fact, in the last stream we did, we just went over an article, by Wabin, uh, which pointed to the Chinese 5-year plan, which is due to end, okay, in 2025. And the article has pointed out that most of the goals of the 5-year plan, 86% of the goals have already been met, okay, and exceeded. And there's a very good chance that they will meet all their goals by the end of 2025. So this doesn't argue for economic collapse. It argues for further growth. And it's probably true that they're going to have even a more ambitious 5-year plan, okay, for the years from 2026 to 2031. They will have another 5-year plan, and it will be perfectly justified by success of the last one. Okay, please go on.
Trumpism.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I scroll down too fast?
Yes. Trumpism strikes directly at the heart of American power, projection, trust.
This is true.
But Trump and Musk are blowing America's imperial foundations to kingdom come. Take USAID, which as the largest distributor of humanitarian aid in the world, has both done a tremendous amount of good work and also served as a carrot for America's global predominance until now. The agency has been all but dismantled, unleashing havoc all over the globe.
Sorry again.
HIV and drug-resistant tuberculosis are now spreading unchecked in many countries reliant on U.S. aid.
Okay, so here we have to make some comments too.
Okay, let me just finish this.
Oh,
U.S. aid. I'm trying to finish that.
oh, okay.
You're taking me all over the place.
I'm sorry.
U.S. aid. Okay, countries reliant on U.S. aid medication, both proving America cannot be trusted and threatening outbreaks of those diseases in the U.S. itself.
Okay, so let me say, I'm sorry I was so anxious to comment on this because it was, in a way, so stupid.
Uh-huh.
First of all, the premise, okay, of this article, okay, suggests that the empire is a good thing for the United States to have. Now, this may be the dumbest collapse, okay, of any empire, but it's also questionable whether we should have the empire, okay, in the first place, and whether we should continue to have it. So if Trump and Musk are blowing up the imperial foundations, that part is not actually necessarily a bad thing. Now take, the U.S. aid example, which is the example that he's studying here, that he's stating here. Okay, U.S. aid has done a lot of good aid work. In other words, the humanitarian work is good. It's a tremendous amount of that, and that should continue. But that is not work that's primarily good from the standpoint of the empire. That is work that can carry on to a different foreign policy that's about collaborating with the rest of the world. But there's another part of U.S. aid, and that's the part that is active in regime change operations all over the world. That's the part that works in collaboration with the NSA and the CIA to overturn governments that we do not like. And uh, if we don't assume that we want to continue to have an empire, we should be very glad that that part, okay, of U.S. aid is also being discontinued with the rest, okay, of U.S. aid. Now, I'm not for the discontinuation, okay, of U.S. aid, but I am for the discontinuation or the disruption of the regime change aspect of it. That needs to be stopped. Okay, and I also have to state, of course, that I think both he and I are opposed to the unconstitutional demolition
Mhm.
of U.S. aid, which is what has been going on here. Okay, I guess I've said what I want to say about that.
Okay. Both Trump and Musk have attacked NATO. Trump has reportedly said he wants to withdraw from the alliance, while Musk has said it, quote, needs an overhaul, and he wonders why it, quote, continued to exist. More importantly, Trump has repeatedly suggested annexing Canada, a NATO member. The enormous implications of this threat are clearly not getting through to many American elites. At the New York Times, Peter Baker has a column blithely speculating about which ways uh, which way Canadians might vote should they be annexed, concluding that Democrats would likely benefit.
Okay, well, I can see the need. I won't say the need. I can see why people might be speculating about that. But it's also true that people might be speculating that uh, because of the idiocy of Trump and his domestic policies, that there might be quite a few states of the U.S. that would be seceding from the U.S. and trying to join Canada,
Mm-hmm.
uh, just because the political orientation of Canada is so much more in line with the political orientation of some of these states. Specifically, just to mention the states involved, okay, I think California, Oregon, Washington, the state of Minnesota, the state of Michigan, the state of Illinois, okay, all of the eastern states going down up from May, uh, 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 um, from Maine, perhaps as far as the state I'm in, specifically Virginia, and okay, including Pennsylvania, might all choose to, to join Canada. The end result of this is that Canada in population would be nearly as large as the United States, and also a much happier place. So if we want to speculate about things, there's more than one way in which we can speculate about it. Okay,
Exactly.
I'm saying here. Okay, but also, uh, okay, the question, okay, of annexing Canada is not simply important in terms of ending the empire, okay, and NATO, but uh, I think the much more important issue is that the idea, okay, of annexing Canada is something that is disturbing our relationship with a very friendly nation whose economy for years has been very well integrated with the U.S. economy. And the networks across the two nations are very much integrated. And if we tried to annex Canada and there was a war, it would probably tank the economy of both of our countries. I mean, this is idiocy.
It is. And
Yeah.
now Canada is turning to China.
Yes, they're turning to China for things. And not just for things, but they're making an agreement with China to import electric vehicles from China. And it's
Mhm.
a long term agreement. And that agreement, of course, is going to stop us, from exporting electric vehicles, that we might want to manufacture here.
Mhm.
In fact, the whole idea is very bad for Musk. I don't know why Musk is even playing around with Trump. I mean, this is going to hurt his business in a very vital way.
I
Okay,
don't think they were thinking. I don't think they were thinking of the fact that other countries would turn to other countries.
they weren't thinking of the fact that countries so closely associated with us would hit back at us.
Hmm.
They were immersed in the myth of American exceptionalism and the idea that our vassals had to obey us and
Yeah.
would obey us. And that is a ridiculous idea, and it speaks to the stupidity of both Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Hmm.
Okay. But it's also terrible from the following point of view. If we're really interested in the security of the United States, then we need to keep our friends who are geographically close to us. We need to keep them friends, and we need to have relationships with them that are win-win relationships.
Yes.
We can't afford to have either Mexico or Canada uh, having conflictful relationships with us. And we're creating that kind of situation now.
Hmm.
Instead of seeking relations with them that are win win for all parties, uh, Trump's trade policies have been disrupting that. And I can't believe that his head of the trade office really supports these policies. I mean, this is Trump's idiocy.
Hmm.
It's really the worst part of his foreign policy at this point. well, I don't know if I would call it the worst part. The only reason why I consider it the worst part is because I don't think his Gaza suggestion that the United States own Gaza is really serious. I think he used that as a ploy to try to get the Arabs to come up with a plan, and they have come up with a plan. And he does have the option now to accept that plan and to get behind a more general framework of a solution that includes a Palestinian state. I don't know if he's going to move that way or not because he's got his donors and also he doesn't like the Palestinians and there are all kinds of other factors, militating against it. But at least the option is there now,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not there before. Okay, but now he can kind of ease into a foreign policy there that might ultimately be successful in keeping the peace. Okay, but this stuff with Canada and Mexico was just, an unmitigated instance of stupid, not just trade policy, but stupid policy from the standpoint of increasing your collective security with your near neighbors. And now, I don't think our European allies are anywhere near as important for our collective security as Canada and Mexico are. They are hugely important, and we need to be cultivating their prosperity and their friendship, as well as our own. Anyway, uh, okay, please go on.
But this is not a political parlor game for Canadians. They are incandescently furious, and they are right to be. Canada stood shoulder to shoulder by America through the great bloodbaths of the 20th century. Since then, it has been a quietly loyal neighbor, making not a peep of trouble along the world's longest land border and providing a vast supply. What was this last?
A vast supply of energy.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. Okay, providing a lot. Oh, yeah, energy, mineral, timber, and other exports to fuel the American economy. And this is the thanks they get. A senile, fascist American president who suggests a war of conquest. And make no mistake, that is what it would take, because he wants to make America look big, but doesn't understand how the Mercator projection exaggerates the size of northern land masses, which it's been reported is one reason for his coveting Greenland too.
Okay, so he's suggesting what Trump needs is a globe. He
Hmm.
needs a globe in the Oval Office so he can
Yes,
see the real proportions of national size.
exactly. Baker's witless speculation isn't even correct. Canadians, if they got to vote under American occupation, a big if, would obviously elect a Canadian Nationalist Party. Trumpism strikes directly at the heart of American power projection, trust. NATO members and other partners go along with the American led order because it has been a pretty good deal, all things considered. Rather than exacting imperial tribute, Europe, Japan, South Korea, and the others were encouraged to develop and become rich. In return, they allowed the U.S. to develop overwhelming military dominance and played along with our control over the global financial system. Threatening unprovoked war on NATO ally for no reason destroys this trust. Indeed, it makes clear that America is now a rogue state led by erratic, violent madmen. Even Hitler felt he had to make up some lying pretext about German minorities being oppressed before he stole the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Trump saw a map and thought, I'll have it. I'll have that.
Yeah. Yes. But by the way, it's the Sudetenland.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Something similar is true of Trump's threatened tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and Europe. We have pre-existing trade agreements with those countries. Indeed, the one with Canada and Mexico was signed by Trump himself. Yet Trump will break his word on a whim. Well, yeah, the U.S. does that all the time anyway.
yes, the U.S. does that all the time, but we also have to remember that the pre-existing trade agreements with those countries that Trump signed by himself are the law of the land, and they were ratified by the legislature. These are not, just executive agreements. That treaty, that trade treaty, is a full-blown treaty. It's the law, okay, of the land. And Trump cannot break the law, on a whim. It's another thing he's doing that's illegal and it's unconstitutional.
Mhm.
Anyway, please go on.
Again, the lesson is clear. America cannot be trusted, and all its former allies should start preparing for the worst, including developing their own nuclear deterrence in case of war with the U.S. itself. Some reserve currency replacement must be found, and new supply chains not reliant on the U.S. set up. Crash military buildups must be carried out to replace American security guarantees. You'd be a fool to rely on any American promises whatsoever, including ones made by Trump or Musk. These men lie as easily as they breathe.
Okay, so on that particular, on that particular paragraph, I suppose I want to make some comments also. Uh, First, Canada and Mexico are both capable of developing their own nuclear deterrence in short order. Also, they probably can get some nuclear weapons from other states in order, to deter any possible attack by the United States on them. In the short run, though, we have to emphasize that there are only 440,000 Americans in the U.S. Army,
Mhm.
and the Marines, I think, have about 120,000 or something like that. And most of them, okay, are overseas. So we don't have a big army to attack the Canadians with, right now. We don't have a big army to attack the Mexicans with right now. In fact, it may be the Mexicans have more soldiers in Mexico than we currently have here in the United States. I'm
Mhm.
not sure about that figure, okay, but I think that Mexico has used its military from
Mhm.
time to time to keep order down there. And so they probably have a fairly sizable standing army for that purpose. And again, we have sent, most of our troops to other nations and to, put people in the 750 bases, we have around the world. Uh, we also have to recognize some military facts here. Population of Mexico is about 130 million people. If they want to, they can field a big army. Okay, not, of course, as large, okay, as our army, but uh, we have to get our army out of the rest of the world and bring it here in order to have a large standing army here. I mean, why are we doing this? Why would we want to create a situation where we even want to fight with Mexico and Canada? And why would we want a situation, where we have a two-front war with those countries? I mean, none of this makes any sense.
It's
But
as if just trying to take down the world,
yes,
thinking you
but
can.
thinking you can. But on the idea of reserve uh, 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 currency replacement, no, they don't have to do that. Okay, because other countries will do deals with them in their local currency.
Mm-hmm.
China will do deals with them in their local currency. Russia will do deals with them, in their local currency. They don't need a reserve currency replacement. Okay, that's a false assumption. Okay, that I think that Ryan is making because he doesn't think that world trade, can take place without a reserve currency. Okay, but also the Canadians and the Mexicans both have considerable stocks of dollars to use for a while in world trade where they need to use, U.S. dollars because, they've been accumulating U.S. dollars for some time because they have trade deficits with the United States. Countries that have trade deficits in the United States are getting paid for their products in U.S. dollars. So they have plenty of U.S. dollars on hand, and they can use those U.S. dollars to trade with at least for some time. So they can use their local currencies and they can use the U.S. dollars to trade with. So that's not going to be a problem for them. They don't need, a new reserve currency in the short run. Okay, they will need new supply chains that are, less reliant on the U.S. And if we force them into doing that, it's going to be very bad for us because they'll be dissolving their ties they have to our economy. And that's really going to hurt both Canada and ourselves and both Mexico and ourselves.
And what are we doing? We're
I mean,
also drawing them to BRICS. What the
yes,
U.S. fears the most. The U.S. fears BRICS, and we'll be pushing other countries, our friends, to BRICS.
we have to remember that Russia uh, and China will be happy to extend the Belt and Road Initiative to Canada. And that will be a big threat to us and our collective security here. And they also be happy to extend, the Belt and Road Initiative to Mexico as well, and to surround us, with Belt and Road Initiative countries. I mean, this is what Trump is doing here is total stupidity. Now, he's right when he says you'd be a fool to rely on any American promises whatsoever, including ones, made by Trump or Musk. These men lie as easily as they breathe. But the
And
same,
that's why Iran, doesn't want to spend years coming together like they did last time with an agreement. And the next thing you know, that when then Trump came in office and that was over with. So it was like just a waste of time.
yes, it was a waste of time and it was a waste of effort. It was very disappointing for them, and they completely mistrust now. And Russia also completely mistrusts us, okay, and the Europeans also. Now they're willing to rebuild ties of trust because they're looking for peace, but it is going to take some time. And if we really want to develop the trust with Russia, China, we cannot be breaking our ties of trust with Canada and Mexico. Okay, because nobody is going to trust us if our immediate neighbors cannot trust us. I mean, they're all going to draw conclusions that we are completely untrustworthy.
Exactly, and go elsewhere.
Yes, if we're, well, they'll come to Canada and Mexico and
Mhm.
develop trust with those countries. And in the end, we're going to be completely isolated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is really a disaster when you think about it.
Right, it's that whole imperialism thought process. American imperialism.
I know. Please go on.
Now, should it annex Canada, Greenland, and or anywhere else that catches Trump's fancy, America would set up a new and different empire, much smaller and weaker, based around explicit violent threats rather than alliances. But it also might just fall to bits. Musk and his Doge neo-Nazi teens have been firing tens of thousands,
Sorry.
firing tens and oops, wait, I gotta make that bigger again. Have been firing tens of thousands of federal workers willy-nilly. The results have not yet been catastrophic domestically, utter chaos at national parks, an apparent sharp increase in airline crashes, and other problems. But the Deutsche Musk Jugend recently illegally fired many of the workers who secure America's nuclear arsenal, apparently by accident, and they are rooting around, running. It says rooting around in the IRS and the Social Security Administration, prompting the head of the latter agency to resign, which hold much of the most sensitive data in the government. It's not hard to imagine this going world historically bad.
Yes.
America suffered no military defeat. We were not outstripped economically by a bigger or better organized competitor.
Okay.
Rather,
I have to argue with that because I think we already may have been outstripped by China,
mhm,
and they are bigger in population. And I think right now they're better organized than we are
mhm.
as a nation.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, but please go on.
Rather, we elected an insane tyrant who is blowing up the foundation of our international power for no reason, all while he lets South African immigrant ultra billionaire and his crew of teeny bopper fascists tear the wiring out of the federal government, again for no reason. Never underestimate the destructive power of stupidity. But like you said, Joe, he's following the directions really he was given by the agenda, the Republican agenda, that whole agenda 2025 nonsense.
Yeah. Okay. What I have to say about that article is the implication of it, or one of the implications for it, of it, is that we, the American people, have made a mistake in 2024 in voting for Trump, and that instead we should have voted for Harris.
But it was just a horrible, horrible situation. Foreign policy was horrific.
It was a horrible, horrible choice. And you can argue that people were not stupid to vote for Trump in that particular situation because they really had only those two choices.
And we also had domestically grocery prices skyrocketing. I'm saying they were very high.
Yes.
So,
Uh, 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 yes. And in the event, Trump's changes in foreign policy may work out. And even if we face all the stupidity of his other policies and all the bad consequences, okay, of the other policy, if his foreign policy choices in West Asia and in relation to China and in relation to Russia work out well, then the risk of nuclear war will be gone for us. And that will be a material gain compared to the situation we had under another stupid administration, which gave us that risk once again for the first time in 40 years, and for no reason. I mean, what Ryan is talking about here is there's no reason for what Trump is doing. But of course, from the point of view of Trump, he has some reason for doing that. It's just from Ryan's point of view, he doesn't have any reasons for doing that. Okay, in like manner, Joe Biden thought he had good reason for his foreign policy. But from my point of view and your point of view, probably, his reasons for his foreign policy were not consequential. And we think there was no reason for following his foreign policy, and it subjected us to the risk of nuclear war in two regions of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the height of stupidity. So what this comes down to is that we had lousy choices in 2024, and that's where the fault lies, with the American people, because we as a people did nothing to try to avoid that false choice. We knew once Biden got elected in 2020 that false choice was coming up for 2024, that we would likely have Trump on one side and Biden on the other for 2024. We should have done everything we could in the intervening years between 2020 and 2024 to prevent that choice. Yet we did not. We did not successfully develop a movement to bring other leaders to the fore and to stop the Republican Party and the Democratic Party from herding us into a choice between these two losers. Of course, Joe Biden did not run in the event, but his choice for the presidency did run. And from all we could tell, she was going to be as bad in foreign policy as he was. So again, we ended up with no real choice in 2024. It takes 4 years to develop other choices, maybe more than 4 years. But let's say, for the sake of argument, it takes 4 years. Then we should be beginning right now to make sure that in 2028, our choices are not some Democratic hack versus Donald Trump. Okay, with the Democratic hack basically running against Trump, because he lost Ukraine for us, or he lost the Middle East for Israel, or both. We can't have that kind of stupid campaign in 2028. We have to be focused on doing what is right for this country, for our neighbors, for a peaceful international system, for a prosperous and much more equal country. And that kind of, of reform is going to take entirely new people coming to the fore for the Congress and for the presidency in the 4 years between now and 2028. If we want a different situation in 2028, we have to work on that different situation right now. And if we don't, we'll be stuck with the same mess
Yeah.
in 2028.
And I was reading up on something, just for curiosity, with Zelensky. This goes back to what he kept talking about, wanting Ukraine to be like Israel, a big Israel, greater Israel. And when you look into that, and even the U.S. Talked about it, but with different language, but saying that the plan was to have the people be like the Israeli people are. You militarize everybody, and you have them protecting, that you're protecting the country from threats, all around threats. So it would be a big security state. It would be like brainwashing the people the same way as Israelis are brainwashed to
What a
fear the neighbors and to fear everybody and to have military everywhere.
what a terrible plan.
Yeah,
What a terrible plan. Of course, it would have been great for the neo-Nazis in Ukraine
yeah,
because
it was
they would have been
terrible.
the muscle. They would have been the muscle for that plan.
Right.
So it would have been great for them.
But horrible for the
Horrible
average
for
person.
everyone else. No thanks. Horrible for everyone else. Okay. Uh, are there more comments, or have we come to the end?
Um, can't see them.
Okay, I notice we have gotten to 12 o'clock, or just about to 12 o'clock,
Okay.
even though we tried to avoid that.
We try to avoid it.
But it seemed like these articles raised so many collateral issues.
Oh, they did. Definitely.
When I selected them, I didn't realize they were going to raise quite so many collateral issues. I mean, I read, the Ryan Cooper article, and I thought there were some stupid comments on it, but I didn't realize there were going to be that many stupid comments. Really.
But it does. You see just exactly what people are thinking. In the public,
Yeah, I know.
and they really aren't aware of a lot that's going on. It's just people are so propagandized.
They're propagandized, and even people who are very acute and very much on point in certain areas of policy are really pretty ignorant in other areas.
Hmm.
And so that's something that, comes to the fore here. I mean, Ryan is so way off when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, I've read a lot of his stuff and I've always liked it. And I realize now that was because he mostly writes on domestic policy.
Oh, last night, Madeline and I were talking about. It was just as if we've talked about this stuff before. We're talking about it again with those real estate sales. The Israeli real estate company, and and in New York, in Borough Park, it's terrible. Um,
Oh, you
they
mean they're doing sales of Palestinian property in Borough Park?
Yeah, at the synagogue there, and they had it scheduled for one date, then they rescheduled it. But the way New York tries to tell the story, um, the New York people, and then we read the article from Mondo Weiss that looked at it and also spoke about the pro-Palestinian um, people that were there to protest. They were there to protest the real estate issue, of Palestinian land. But then you had New York, you had some of the representatives, and the way they were looking at it as an anti-Semitic event, that people were, um, had a problem with Jewish people, and that was not the issue at all. You had a rabbi that was, with the movement that's always out there protesting. He's an 80-year-old man in a wheelchair, and some of these Zionists went and they were trying to scuff him up, and they were just being very brutal. And I just was like, it was what you see over in West Asia. They were doing right in Borough Park, and they were acting as if people were there against the community there, and they were just against the real estate sales. But New York tried to make it out to be like it was an people were being anti-Semitic.
Uh, they were trying to make it out as if the Jewish people were being anti-Semitic.
Well, the people who were standing with, yeah, actually, the people that were standing against the real estate sale, it didn't
Yeah,
matter who you were. If you were being anti-Semitic, and yes, there were Jewish people there protesting.
yeah, there were Jewish people there. There were probably Orthodox Jewish people there
Yes,
who were protesting, right? There were probably rabbis there who were protesting.
yes,
Yes, there were those Orthodox rabbis there, right?
yes,
They usually are in New York.
yeah. So they're there saying it's wrong, and then you have New York making it out to be, because you could have had, as I said to Madeline, that event could have happened outside a Jewish community. They could have had it at any location, really. Pick a location. It was about the event itself. It was about the event itself, and they just, New York just tries to make everything out as though it's anti-Semitic. But we talked about that. It was a pretty long article, and then there was another article we had gone over, and it's just crazy. They were saying, I'd have to show it to you, because the prices in Israel for some of these places, what they're talking about, and selling places as well. There was a person that wrote in the comments about it's so expensive. The average person that lives over in Israel, they can't afford a say a space that would be better for their family. They have to be squished into a place,
I
a
know.
smaller place, because everything's so expensive. So Madeline brought up the term, the gentrification there. They just want certain Jewish people to live there. If you don't have money, we don't want you. It's kind of making it difficult for poorer Jews to live. So how is that making, being a safe place for Jews around the world? That's not safe if making life difficult just because you have these people that have extreme wealth. Then I was thinking with Trump, with him and Jared Kushner, with that whole Gaza thing, talking about wanting to make this like an elite place.
Yeah, the Gaza Riviera.
Yeah, so they want to change much of Israel itself
Yes.
into an elitist place, and then and that just totally turns the whole reason for people going to Israel, saying it to be a safe location for Jews that need to escape whatever region where they're living around the world, and say something horrible is going on, and this is supposed to be a safe place for Jews to go. It's just
Yeah, I think that dream is dead because of the foreign policy that Israel itself has followed over the years. They have destroyed Israel as a safe place to live. They could have made it, okay, a safe place to live. But to do so, they had to make peace with the Palestinians.
mhm.
And most of their opportunities for doing that, they destroyed after the 1973 war. Actually, after the 1967 war. They just did the wrong thing.
Yes, it did the wrong thing, exactly. And it's just they've done
Historically,
nothing.
the wrong thing. They dug their own graves.
They did. They they dug it so deep because the world is seeing something that it's like, who are these people?
Yeah. Who are these people? They are the last thing we thought they were.
Exactly.
It's awful.
It is. Oh, then the word pogrom was brought up with Borough Park, and it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, there's a pogrom going on. It's not a program, not a
Yeah,
program. It's a genocide,
yeah,
and we know where that's going on.
right. I mean,
Everybody knows where that's going on.
right. So for them to try to make something out where Borough Park, Brooklyn is concerned, it's always been, a safe place and a thriving place, and you know, people, Brooklyn with their different neighborhoods, people mind their own business, and it's always, well, for a long time, it's been that way. The different communities, different groups living in different sections.
Did you see Bernie's on the road?
Yes, and I know people are annoyed with him.
Why are they annoyed with him?
It has to, from what I hear, it has to do some of the stuff with his foreign policy.
Oh, but he's been getting better in foreign policy again.
Or has he?
I think so. I mean, he's obviously uh, he's opposed to the Ukraine war at this point,
Okay.
and he's certainly opposed to the genocide in Gaza at this point, also.
Okay.
So,
Because
I mean, it seems to me that uh, he's back on track. Okay, but I can't imagine that he's going to run for president again. I mean, he'd just be too old. He's like 83 already.
I think what he's doing is trying to do what was done before. I don't think he's right. I think he's just trying to talk to the Democrats, talk to the country and give it image.
Yeah, he doesn't sound like he's trying to talk to Democrats. Sounds like he's trying to talk to people in general, that he's trying to whip up a resistance to Trump.
Hmm.
And Trump and Musk.
Yes.
And yeah, that's good. But, we need new and younger leaders to emerge uh, who are compelling, and who are running on the same issues as Bernie, but who are more consistent and who were not, diverted by the Democrats
Right.
and their imperatives for power. Uh, I think in 2016 that Bernie should have run the third party then. I'm not sure he would have won, uh, but I think it would have shaken up the political system a lot more had he run. And that, it would have moved, the Democratic Party over to the left.
I think he was nervous when it came to, we all know the history with the Clinton machine. And there's reason to worry about your safety, your family's safety, and
I don't think he was worried about that. I think he was worried about uh, his status in Congress. That he would lose his status as ranking member in the Senate, and when the Democrats won as committee chair. I think he always valued that too much.
But also there was threatening phone calls made to his wife too. There was threats being made. So,
Yeah,
you have to look at your family. And
you have to look at your family, but all the third party candidates get those threats. I'm sure Jill Stein has been the object of many threats herself, right?
hmm well, when it comes to the Clintons, we know they have a track record.
They do.
So, but anyway, so yeah, like you said, I wish there were some younger people that could basically, Bernie could mentor. That it would be good to have younger people with Bernie and people, be the next Bernie Sanders. It would be a good thing because, like you said, he's older himself, and yeah, you're rallying up people like he's done in the past. I mean, it helps the Democrats for him to rally the people up against Trump.
It does.
But like you said, we need the younger people. We need the younger generation. We need people to. But then again, he did do that when he ran. He did get people. He did inspire people to run for office, and you know,
Yeah, I think he's improved the makeup of the Congress. I mean, at least on the Democratic side. I think the representatives, okay, on the Democratic side, are much more lefty than they used to be.
and that would be good with the upcoming, with the next elections.
Yeah,
Um, inspiring younger people and getting more younger people in there.
yeah. You need the younger people, and you need the opposition to the money in politics.
Yes. So that would. So right now, that what he's doing, yeah, is good.
Yes, what he's doing now is good. Talking against that, making people aware. Maybe after all, we'll be able to do a dump the corruption campaign.
Yes, that would be great.
Problem is, I'm older than Bernie Sanders.
I know, well, I know Greg is very busy all the time because it's Greg's excitement is always good with that, with the dump the corruption and
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Greg is funny when he talks about dump the corruption.
yes, he's got a lot of energy with it, and and if he could bring in a crowd of people.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 12:07,
Okay.
12:08. So is anything else we should say?
I can't think of anything right now. I think I've run out of steam.
I know it's
I've run out of steam for the night.
yes, it's been a lot. We covered a lot.
We did cover
Uh,
a lot. These articles were good that way.
yes. So you got through all the stuff you wanted to get through.
I got through all the stuff I wanted to get through and more. I
Yeah.
think there were a lot of issues that got brought up that I wasn't explicitly thinking about. I
hmm
found when I was going through the Stephanie article, all thoughts of, things occurred to me just as
hmm
I was going through it. So I was pleased with the commentary on it.
Yes.
I thought it brought up a lot of points. So it was good. Uh,
Yes. So you'll be back on Tuesday, and I'll be joining you on Tuesday.
well, thank you. That'll be
At
great.
yes, 9 p.m. Eastern time, and
Okay, are you going to be back on Monday?
um, so far I don't have anything. I don't have anything for Sunday and Monday. But if something should arise, then That would be a different story. But so far, I don't have anything planned.
Okay. Okay.
Alrighty. We'll call it a night. Joining here.
We will call it a night. Right.
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And
Yes.
good night, Dee. And good night, Evelina. Good night, Earl of Lurie. Good night, Steve Wolfbrandt, if you're still here. And gee, we had about 34 people here, but not that many in commenting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, a lot of times people are busy doing other things and they're just listening.
Yes, I know. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you again, Dee, and good night. And
Yeah, good night.
have a wonderful weekend.
You too. And here, Steve Wolfbrand says good night.
Yeah, good night, Steve.
Good night, Steve.
And take care of yourself, Steve.
Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Bye.